I think maybe we'll get started.
Okay.
I suspect a few more people will drift in, but I like to not keep the people who are prompt waiting. So welcome to our spring series of talks about data sets and patent data sets. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to sort of kick it off with a general discussion about guidelines and policies for data sharing, and Sam Klein is going to lead that discussion. So I will turn it over to him. Sam, you want to take it away?
Fantastic. And Agnes Cameron is also presenting with me to help introduce how people can use different kinds of repositories. I included a link to the slides in the chat. And Laura, if you want to post a link to the notes as well, we're taking live notes. Let's see. Welcome, everyone. For the spring, there were a lot of different discussions that touched on data sharing practices last fall. And so we have a series of talks that are about ways to share data and some of the dilemmas and challenges faced, and things that we could all learn to do better together. We have workshops lined up for the next 6 weeks or so. And today was just intended as an informal session to talk about related tools that you use for sharing, how you've chosen repositories, and how you've worked through some of these questions in your own research, and tips for how to make your own data easier to use so that other people don't have to jump through the kind of hoops that we do when compiling things from different sources. There are a lot of data repository options out there, and usually the first question that you have to answer before deciding how you annotate your data is where you're going to put it. And sometimes, depending on that choice, you end up with different affordances for what you can say about it and how you can make it visible. I tend to use Dataverse more than other things. It's convenient to be able to always migrate to a locally hosted instance of something that you're used to if it turns out that the institution that you're working with has a lot of different people who want to incorporate a repository into their workflows before deciding that the data can leave the country. So Agnes, do you want to give an intro to Dataverse?
Yeah, sure. I'll just share my screen. Hi. So this is just this is the kind of Dataverse homepage. So there's a bunch of different places that you can share and upload data and get a permalink to it, so get a DOI for it, get a reference for it, all these other things. And actually, we've been enumerating a bunch of these in a document. This is linked in the Google Doc, which is this shared notes, and you're all really heavily invited to use it and add to it and annotate it and add registries that you use. So there's one for data sets, papers, code, and toolkits. But anyway, there's a lot of these different repositories out there. I'm mostly going to talk about Dataverse today and also very briefly talk about Zenodo. In general, these two kind of platforms, I think, are used a lot by different researchers in the community, and Matt will talk more about Zenodo in his session later in this series as well. So this is just to give you an intro to Dataverse. All of these platforms have kind of, different features to them. Dataverse currently file uploads are capped at 2.5 gigabytes, whereas Zenodo is at 50 gigabytes, although that feature is also something that's currently being tested. So Dataverse might also quite soon also be having 50 gig file upload limit. Both of these projects are free. The Dataverse also has a very active community. They have a community Slack that you can join, different developer groups, and in general invite kind of contributions and feature requests are very responsive. And as evidence to that, Phil from Dataverse is also on this call today. So if I say anything, inaccurate, please correct me. But this is just to kind of give you guys like a very short overview of how to add a data set to Dataverse, and also to make you aware of the fact that i3 has a place to put data if you want to link your data sets to an i3 collection on Dataverse. So this is the homepage. It's at dataverse.harvard.edu. Or other institutions, your institution might run its own Dataverse. And so that also is something that's worth checking out. All this means is that there's like a place that's managed and administrated by your institution that's a version of this Dataverse. It will still be able to issue with a DOI and have all of the same feature, or like many of the same features. It varies a little bit place to place. Oh, hey, Matt.
Just a quick question, and I think I know the answer to this, but people talk about Dataverse and then the Harvard Dataverse. Someone told me it's an instantiation of like an open source repository, like you could build your own, you could cut. Can you help us sort that out? Because I've never quite gotten my head around that. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. And I will say as well that this is probably where I'll say something very inaccurate. So Phil is maybe also a good person to pipe up at this point. But in general, my understanding of it is that dataverses are like, you as an institution can be like, I want to run a Dataverse, spin up a server, and run the Dataverse software. And so Dataverse is a piece of software that's developed by the Institute for Qualitative Social Sciences at Harvard. As well as this, Harvard run a Dataverse which anyone can join. And so there's the kind of version of this is like, if you're an institution, you could run a Dataverse that was private and was just existed for your institution's researchers to share data with one another, or you could run a instance of Dataverse which is just linked to your institution. So I think there's like a forestry institute that runs a Dataverse and they use it as a platform for this very specific kind of data. But a lot of researchers will just use Harvard Dataverse. So the Harvard Dataverse is the Dataverse that's hosted by Harvard. And this has like, I think it's the biggest one. It has a really large number of data sets, and it's maintained by the same people that make Dataverse. So if you, it's one that is just there for the community. There's also one that I will add a data set to today, which is the demo Dataverse. This is a Dataverse that's like hosted specifically so you can upload random files to try it out and like figure out how it works, play around with different structures. And so I'll show you that in a moment. But yeah, the Harvard Dataverse is, what's nice about it is even without being a separate institution, you can still set up institutional communities within this server. And so you don't have to administer your own server to run a Dataverse community. And so we've made a Innovation Information Initiative Dataverse. And this then contains a set of sub-Dataverses. So all this means is that this is like a bin, and you, as a user of the Dataverse, or if you want, we can also do this. You can upload and link your data under these kinds of umbrellas. And so this is just, and I mean, you could also have ideas for different kind of groups and sets of data that you'd like to see. And so at the moment, these things don't have anything in them. But if you want your data to be in this Dataverse, you can get in touch with us or /upload it yourselves. I think it's possible to just add your own data to this without many permissions, but I'll check that. But the idea is really to have a place where different researchers in the community can link the data sets they use. And this is part of this project that we're doing to kind of create an accessible catalog of like open innovation related data sets.
Can I ask a question about this page?
Yeah.
Can you have more than one, can you be in more than one subject? I noticed here.
Yes, you can.
Social sciences. This one should be in business and management too. It's very heavily used by business and management as a subject.
Sorry, Bronwyn, could you explain?
You see there's social sciences, right, under the subjects, and there's also business and management.
Uh-huh.
And the I3 initiative should be in business and management as well as social science for people who are searching.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'll
Yeah. That was just, I mean, it's just a comment.
Yeah, that's a great point. No, that's great. Please, that's very welcome, and like that kind of comment's really helpful. I'll add it to that. Yeah, you can definitely add stuff to more than one category at the same time. I feel like business and management may have been a recent addition, but maybe I just didn't notice it before. Anyway,
But
yeah, you can definitely do that. And
yeah, it could
Right?
be recent. Given how low it is, it could be recent.
Yeah, and also when you search, it will search across all subjects, correct? So you will be able to find it whether you are searching, whether it is in social science or business or whatever. If you search by subject or for the specific data sets, I assume that the search here will search across subjects, correct, Agnes?
yeah, I think you can have an advanced search where you filter by subject as well, though.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about people browsing. You know, if you're browsing, I mean, the reason it's classed by subject is presumably because that's useful. And so, you know, you'd want it to be there.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, that I will do that. And okay, so then this I was just gonna kind of demonstrate. So this is on the demo Dataverse, and this is because I'm just uploading a sample data set to demonstrate. So if you want to test stuff out, the main Dataverse is for like real high quality version research data, and the demo Dataverse is like if you're like, you know, seeing how it works. And so this I've actually just set this form up, but this, if you click on add data, this is the form that you get to. It's pretty straightforward. It's just one page, and so it's an opportunity to add in the metadata that will then be the thing that's like searchable and kind of downloaded with your data set and part of the data set reference and citation. And so this is a tiny extract of Matt Marks's data set, Reliance on Science and Patenting. This is just like a very small CSV. Yeah, shout out to Reliance on Science, which is actually hosted on Zenodo, but in part, I think, because of its size. But so this is, I'm just adding, I guess, you know, this should probably say Matt Marks because he's the author, but this is, I'm just like adding this like tiny sample extract. It's just a test. I've linked this publication that it's linked to, so you can link it to a publication that has a DOI, and that's link is going to be stored as part of the dataset's metadata as well. And then what last thing I'm going to do is going to select a file to add, and I'm going to select patent sample data. And so this is just a CSV file. And so this is going to upload, and then I can save this data set. And so when it uploads, it's going to get recognized as a tabular file. And then, yeah, like, Roman was saying, I can also edit bits of the file metadata itself. So I could do something where I upload a provenance file, which is a file format that allows you to like explore the file's history. I can also add tags to this. And so I'm just gonna tag it as data. You can tag other things as well. I'm just gonna save these changes, and it's tagged as data, and I can save this data set. I'm gonna just like, here's one I've made earlier. So I uploaded the same file. It's it's got all this metadata that I added about it. And the neat thing you can do with tabular data is you can also preview it. So this is going to open a, and this is just a CSV, same CSV that I uploaded, but you notice it's now a .tab file. And that's because it's processed by the Dataverse as tabular data. And so you can explore it online. And this is a really, really nice feature that maybe is just like a really quick way of having explorable version of the data. And so this is this like nice spreadsheet viewer format. And there's a bunch of kind of development going on with that as well. So yeah, and then this is the III community. And so this is, I already showed you it. The last thing I was just going to mention quickly is that Zenodo is also this kind of other platform. It's run by CERN. It's a central server, so it doesn't have multiple servers. You can't, I believe, run your own version of Zenodo if you wanted to, but it does support kind of large data uploads, and it also does have communities on it, although the constraints around making a Zenodo community are slightly more involved than making a Dataverse community. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had to say. I would definitely say take a look at this landscape document, add any repositories you think are really worth talking about. And also, in general, Dataverse is a really great project and a really great kind of community-led initiative to share open data. And so also it's just a good place to put your data in general. But yeah. Phil, do you have anything to add about the Dataverse or data sharing generally?
Yes, thanks for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. I see there are a lot of questions in the chat that sort of come up as well, this 2.5 gigabyte limit. And we've been working a lot on improving this situation. That limit is not in the software, it's configurable by anyone who installs Dataverse. I think I mentioned in the chat there are 67 installations of Dataverse around the world. So, and I haven't checked the latest. So you guys probably know better than I do, like in production, Harvard Dataverse, if it's 2.5 gigabytes per file, I believe you. But I do know that because we've been working hard on integrating more tightly with S3, that's Amazon's storage service, that nowadays we are supporting like 50 gigabyte files, for example. Because the idea is that instead of pushing the file through our servers, we basically hand off the connection. So it goes from your laptop straight up into S3. So it's a lot easier to get bigger files in that way. So I would say that if you have a need to store larger files, that you should get in touch with our support team. And if you go to Harvard Dataverse, up at the top, there's an about link. And there you'll see the support site, and you'll see an email address there, or even from the app itself, if you click support, you can type in a message that'll go to our support team. And then that's per file, like whether it's 2.5 or 50 gigabytes. But we also allow researchers to host up to a terabyte of data for free. So sometimes people do tricks where they make the file smaller, but I think these days we're moving toward, we have to do a little fiddling on the back end to allow certain researchers to have the larger file limit, but then still keep the 2.5 across the board. So I hope that helps. And I'm happy to answer more questions about Dataverse. It seems like a great community.
So Phil, so are you saying that if I had contacted Dataverse, instead of assuming that limit was a hard and fast rule, I could have avoided Zenodo entirely? Wow, I wish I had thought to do that. That's great.
I think so. I guess the lesson is it doesn't hurt to ask.
Okay, no, I never thought to. Okay.
But Zenodo is a fine platform, and it's been mentioned that it's centralized, and that's true. But my understanding is that they are working on a release of their software that can be installed by other institutions. So I think it's called Invenio, and so look for that if you're in the market for installing some software. You know, there are lots of things like Dataverse, DSpace, and Fedora Commons. So, you know, I would encourage people to look around and see what works for you.
Thanks, Phil. So nice to have you join.
Yeah.
So once you choose, once you've chosen a repository, you have to decide how you describe the data sets that you post. And different communities have different guidelines for what's considered best practice. Lars Vilhuber gave a lovely discussion about what the social science data editors recommend on Friday. Matt, did you make it to the entirety of his talk?
No, I had a conflict. I missed it. Is it recorded anywhere?
There was I don't know.
I'm going to check his Twitter. He would probably tweet it if so.
I saw part of it, and I love the written version of their recommendations. Some of the context is their journals have a dedicated data editor. Most journals don't yet, but this is increasingly common. And they give you lots of help in how to flesh out the README files for your data repositories so that you don't get a blanket rejection saying, please add more context and come back. So let me just briefly share what that looks like. And this offers a nice complement to the longer list of the long data sharing and model sharing checklists that I3 has published. The first thing that all these processes will want you to do is register the data in some way, but by making sure that it is in a repository. So even if you aren't using Dataverse or Zenodo, making sure that it's not just on your personal site, but that it's stored somewhere where it gets indexed. And then figuring out the kind of metadata other people would need to decide if they can use your work in their research or if they can replicate what you've done. So the social science data editors primarily focus on having a provenance statement and summarizing not just what license it's under, but how available it is, how to access it, and then splitting out a list of all of your individual data files and having some data set list like this. And then if you're doing computation on it, specifying at least the minimum requirements to do something interesting, and ideally a full virtual machine or environment with all the libraries that are expected. We had this longer checklist that we will help walk people through in April when we run a metadata and dataset workshop for enhancing the description of data sets that are already published or putting new sort of strangely shaped data sets that you found hard to publish online. The one other point that people often don't mention is identifying what your plans are for the full lifespan of the data set. Who's going to maintain it? Does someone else need to offer to guarantee that it stays online for decades? And some of the associated concerns around mirroring and archiving tie back into details of licensing and access. If people don't have access, are there at least mirrors and archives that have access? So questions for open discussion. With that as a little bit of context, I'd love to hear what people have found easy and hard about the last data sets that you've published, and challenges that the group might be able to help resolve.
Well, I can speak about the COVID-19 data set that we published in March to 2020. What I found difficult was because we publish it based on subject matter and different collections, and whether it is patent or scholarly or sequences, maintaining that updated and available to the community was a big challenge for us, because we were not completely focused on just maintaining the data. And so we were able to, we had to decide on just maintaining it, let's say on monthly basis sometimes. And after a while, once many others started to share their data, we just kept it unupdated. So that's something that we have experienced with the data sharing.
Saying once other people had joined you in updating their data sets, you could spend more time on maintenance?
Oh, so we branched it, because we started with the general data set on the human coronaviruses as related to SARS. But when SARS-CoV-2 data started to be available and openly available, then we decided to, if you want, park that data set and focus more on different aspects of the SARS-CoV-2 and start making these openly available. And so maintaining both then was a big challenge for us to do. And recently we found a way to mitigate this problem by creating dynamic collections that could be updated automatically. And so every time the data is released, this dynamic collection will be updated, and therefore when you come, you would access it. But I also heard before with Bronwyn or Heidi saying that, maybe in different disciplines, like in social science, you want to maintain a certain data sets that will be replicable across different users' studies or research. And for that, you don't want to keep it changing or keeping updated. You want a regular marked version of a data set. And so these, where do you store it? There is a big difference between how you maintain a dynamic collection versus a static collection, I think.
How did you work that out for the COVID data?
For the COVID data, so we had the old collections. Right now they are available on the site without any update. The new collections, they are all dynamic collections that are auto-updated.
And do the auto-updating collections produce a time series of static?
No.
Timestamped versions?
No, they are just auto-updated and marked with the date. And because some of these collections, they need to be manually curated as well, you would be able, if you are notified as a user, you will be able to see the old versus the new, and then decide what to add, what not, how to curate.
I see. But if you're a user and you need a static version of what you're looking at?
Yeah, so you could download that static version and make the collection static, not dynamic. So we offered the two options where people could download their data static, not dynamic.
Does the Dataverse platform have versioning in some way as a feature built into it, or is it something that's always sort of done ad hoc?
I guess I'll take that. Yeah, versioning is built into Dataverse. We have this concept of major and minor versions where we'll say if you haven't changed any files, like if all the bits of the files are the same, the data files, then you can go from version 1.0 to 1.1, 1.2, if you're just changing metadata about the files. But then if you change files, if you delete or add files, then we enforce a major version change. So from 1.0 to 2.0. But even when you go to 2.0, you can always still go back to 1.0, right? So if you've put in your paper the citation to the data set, that is version 1, researchers can still go back to version 1, even if you're up to version 7 in your data set.
So I may not have the right language for talking about this because I don't really understand it, but is it in effect that there's a distinct DOI for the different versions of the data set?
You know, it's a feature request to have DOIs at the version level, and Dataverse does not have that right now. What we have is a DOI at the data set level, and those data sets can have multiple versions. So in practice, to cite a specific version, say version 3, you would give the DOI of the data set and then say version 3 of this data set.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
And if you wanted to fork a version at some point in time and just make a new Dataverse directory and give that its own DOI, is there a way to do that and preserve the link between that and the dynamic?
Yeah, you could certainly just copy the files into a new data set, and that any new data set would always get a new DOI, and then you can link them. There are metadata fields to link related data set or something like that you could link to the old data set for sure.
Other examples people have run into recently?
Sure, I'll bite. So, excuse me. So I haven't put up a new version of my data in a bit. I'm trying to port it over to the Cornell servers, and it's taking a while. But one thing I've run into is interoperability. So just one example, I got an email from somebody who's saying, your data doesn't, like, I can't match your patent numbers with this patent database I'm working with. And so we spent, let's see, I won't say many hours. We spent hours trying to figure out why that was. And it turns out that one of us was removing leading zeros and one of us was not removing leading zeros. And that was, that was not a great use of anyone's time. So that's just something I run into. I don't have a great idea on how to solve it. But ultimately, people want to link these data sets to others. And I feel like I need to do a better job of how to anticipate potential problems like that. So I add that to the list.
That's a generic problem, which is that if your email is in a public database, it does create a lot of demand, some of which should have been solved by the user. I mean, that particular problem is one that happens a lot. And, not with patent numbers, just with any kind of numbers, CUSIP numbers. If you try to match CUSIP numbers, you get the same problem.
Sure.
Because as soon as you turn it, and it's actually, you can fix it, but it takes a little bit of coding to fix it. And the user really shouldn't be bothering you with that. Beyond pointing out that it's an issue. But you shouldn't be spending hours fixing their problem.
Yeah, I thought I'd messed up the patent numbers somehow. So
yeah, so it's you think it was your mistake?
I thought it was.
Yeah, USPTO numbers actually are all, unless you go very early, are all the same number of digits, so it shouldn't actually be an issue. But in any case, I think it's just a generic problem, which is the amount of time it takes to support this kind of data. I think codifying the things that are happening with Dataverse and with the social science guidelines is extremely helpful on that, because that mitigates some of the problems that users have and contact.
And perhaps we could use the community within Dataverse to document, like the thing that Matt just described, that specific problem. If there were a note there, then at least the next person who comes along would know
exactly
to look at that. And if we started maintaining sort of a, I don't know, kind of almost a wiki of issues that arise within our data specifically, maybe that would cut down a little bit on people having to solve the same problem over and over again.
Yeah, and well, I think there's something like this for PatStat, which I found once. It wasn't easy to find though, which turned out to be quite helpful. And it's, you know, it's modeled on their 5 million support databases out there that one finds with a Google search, you know, for Microsoft or Windows or, you know, any of Stata and so forth. There's, and they sometimes are quite useful. In fact, sometimes they're the most useful support rather than the sponsored support.
I imagine that the Dataverse has support pages and frequently asked questions that people refer to if there are issues and they are resolved, publicly available, right, Phil?
Yeah, we have a lot of documentation and such things, but it's mostly oriented around using the software and installing the software. It's not, what I'm hearing is that we're talking about like leading zeros and patent numbers, if I'm understanding right.
Issues
So,
with the data interoperability.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if the question is specific to the data, to that level, I would imagine a good way to go would be to put it in a README or in the description of the data set, just somewhere to kind of put any gotchas people might have trying to use the data. I mean,
I don't really know, but I'm speculating that there might be a level in between specific to one data set and generic to all of Dataverse, which are issues that tend to arise with innovation data, you know, and if we as a community have a set of data sets that are related to each other, you know, there might be, I don't really know, but there might be some value to trying to find a way to have frequently asked questions or frequently encountered problems that we could tabulate at that level. I mean, I'm just guessing that might be helpful.
But it's possible that the best home for that is the i3 website, you know, which is the place where it's pooled. I mean, it's clearly not Dataverse's responsibility to run.
Right.
Yeah,
no, I wasn't saying it was their responsibility.
Yeah, FAQs for every single data set that is out there. But I don't know, do you think people would find it if it was on the i3? You know, if there were general comments about using the data, you know, generally, general, you know, FAQs or whatever you want to call it, about using patent data, or, you know, as I said, I think PatStat has a discussion online which would be useful to reference.
you know, another thought is about code. I don't know how common it is for you to put code alongside your data, but maybe the code, maybe some Python that strips the leading zeros out of your patent numbers or something. So it's just very clear to someone who's familiar with Python, this is what I need to do to use this data.
That's a good point. Like maybe I should, in the documentation, I should say, note, I stripped out leading zeros. And if you don't do that, they won't merge. Like something simple like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things like that ex post one knows to put. The question is avoiding it happening in the first place. I mean, I'm not sure that you're stripping out leading zeros was a bad thing. I mean, you know, as I say, I think the user should have looked at both files and figured it out. I mean, that's what I did.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, I really don't.
Yeah, it was one of those, a third of your data is unmergeable. I'm like, send me a sample. I'm like, I found all of those on the USPTO website. Why don't you find it? Oh.
Yeah, it's, you know, I mean, I can't tell you how many things of that sort I have solved in my day.
Yeah, are there data cleaning libraries that people find useful in wrestling with common data sources? Sometimes that's a place where these issues show up. If there isn't a team like the PatStat team, someone who's building a library that just cleans up a bunch of confusions might end up having an issue on the library saying, here's a kind of confusion that I wish would also be solved. Can you solve it? Data
cleaning is awfully data specific. I mean, particularly data set specific, which makes it harder to generalize.
Yeah, the one tool I keep hearing about is Open Refine, but I've never used it, but it's supposed to be a generic tool for cleaning data.
Hmm.
Yeah, Open Refine has a plugin framework that at least a few people have used to try and make it useful to new sources. Most of the plugins that I've seen are good at catching human typing errors, or it can learn what it can infer a standard vocabulary for a category, so that if you tell it that one of your columns is state capitals and you have a string that's not a state capital, it will suggest what you might have meant.
Yeah, the individual variable problems. Yeah, it's like upper lower case. I mean, you know, I mean, that's fixable, but boy, you'd be surprised how many people don't notice it. You know, matching on words when people have mixed cases.
Or people using Windows font quotes and hyphens.
Oh, yeah. Well, character sets.
Character sets.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you've run into when you're trying to share data, other than size constraints?
Well, you know, one issue we ran into just this week is that we have a lot of data stored on a Google website, and it's stored as zip files, and many people are now finding they can't download the zip files because lots of systems have built-in defenses against zip files because they can carry security risks. And I mean, it makes sense, you know, but it means that, you know, what we're going to do, of course, is we're going to unzip them because the computers have changed and the size limit is no longer a big deal. Although, of course, that'll come back. I mean, right, the 2.5 gig thing tells you that, you know, there's always going to be a need for compressing data. Because one way around the 2.5 have a lot that we have a lot of numbers. Compress well, because it reduces enormously. And that's the obvious way to get under a 2.5 gig limit. It may not always work, but it'll help a lot. And so zip files are, you know, we can't download zip files basically. Now that I thought that what people did was just rename the extension and tell people they'd done that. But I don't know if that's widely done. You know, so people could rename it once it got on their computer, and then unzip it.
Where is the policy set that doesn't allow them to download the zip file?
Well, we're not entirely sure. I found on Windows 10 that I'd previously been able to download them, and when I tested it, I found that it told me it couldn't do it. That, you know, it rejected it for security reasons. And I don't have a scanner on my browser because that just causes trouble. I do have a download scanner, I think. I'm not even sure. Other people reported various errors of that kind, you know, of different forms. But Besson told me he was able to do it if he right-clicked and downloaded. He couldn't do it by clicking on it, but he could do it by right-clicking and saving. You know, this Windows. I mean, you know. So, you know, there you are. I mean, the point is that even if only half the world has trouble downloading, it's, you know, you can't have that. I mean, it's a problem. We're not going to fix the antivirus programs. You know, we're just going to have to deal with them.
Yeah, that seems like something that a repository could help with without making you unzip things.
I would like to tell, for example, when we analyze the activity of inventors. In patents data, we have the data of the patent. But if you want to analyze which factors could explain the propensity of the inventors to invent, you need to have the information about the age, about if they have PhD, their institution, if they live in the country where the invention was made, and these things are important that to build a data set of the inventors. For example, now I am doing a research about the migration of Mexican inventors. And it is not, it is difficult to identify if they live in another country, if they live in Mexico and they work for a multinational. Therefore, I think it is important to build a data about inventors. I don't know, what do you think? Or perhaps it is done.
That sounds like new data sets that could be posted to some of these registries.
I've been
Is there something
trying to make what Manuel Trachtenberg did with the names game useful for others. I haven't had enough time to work on it because I'm trying to work on something else, but I am hoping to put that out. The methods, this is mostly about name standardization, you know, figuring out who's the same and who's different. But in the USPTO data, and there is a data set on the NBR website, but I don't think it's the latest version that he did. And he sent me all his files, basically. You know, that's a start, but it's mainly the methods that would be useful because, of course, his data ends at a certain point. I think probably 1999 or something, or 2006, I'm not sure which. It's mainly, you know, what he did as far as language processing to figure out misspellings, etc. when you have international inventor names. I believe other people here know that additional information on inventors is available for various people have done projects of that kind.
Yes, I am invited to USPTO to talk about entity resolution. And so any reference, Bronwyn, you have on name standardization, harmonization, or disambiguation will be very useful.
Do you have Manuel's paper?
Maybe
on this topic, because I will definitely send it to you.
Please, no, I might not. Manuel's work, I would be grateful.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, so to Alenka's questions, yes, if you search in the lens right now, once we release the new patent architecture in the UI, you will be able to trace the addresses of the inventor and their location. And we are working towards linking the institutional affiliation of the inventors to as well to the authors, so that you will be able to harmonize the name based on a human being rather than, you know, whether it's an author or an inventor, and collect all the metadata around an inventor. So that's our next step after the after finishing the PMR, is to start on the doing a meta record based on the inventor or on the name, any name. So that's that's in progress, and we have started that. Okay.
Linking this to one of the previous topics, OpenRefine has the idea of a reconciliation endpoint where you can broadcast that you have a reconciliation service. And if someone sends you a string, you will try to connect it to an existing entity in some other database. Here's a link to the API. And there's a growing catalog of these APIs that are online.
Great, these are good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, my experience with matching, which is, it looks like reconciliation could be a useful input to that, is that it's greatly helped by using word frequency in the data set. You know, I mean, this is obvious to most people here, I think, who've done this. I wonder if reconciliation enables you to do that. I mean, whatever it is, OpenRefine software. In other words, it needs information from the rest of what you're doing in order to figure out whether this is a match, you know, a resolution it should make.
That's interesting. You can supply a local data set that's used for reconciliation, but the default is the data set that you provide are all of the entities that you care about, rather than background information that could be used for some of those statistics. So it sounds like that would be a feature request for them, but they do have the mechanism for the person poking the API to also provide.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of
data along
word level as opposed to entry level, if you see what I mean. It's the individual words, you know, there are a lot of garbage words that are uninteresting for matching, for, you know, no interaction. Anyway, I'll have to look into it. It looks interesting.
Hi there. Can I ask a question?
Please.
Somebody who did not share the public data publicly before, but I am intending to share a historical pattern data set, the one that I presented in your fall talk. So, you know, it's a lot of data, and I spent 5 years building that. So I'd love the profession, you know, people to use that data. I have a question about practically how. So I looked through your checklist of putting together a data set, and you guys talk about registering the data. Can you? What I'm thinking about practically, how do you post the data and make sure that people just do not copy it over and post it somewhere else? I know it's a naive question, but as somebody who haven't faced this kind of issue, can somebody talk about these issues? And, you know, we have people here who've done that, been there, done that. Thank you.
That's a good question. So you mean how to make sure that someone else doesn't repost it under their name?
Somewhere, yeah. Do you recommend, like, I don't know, what are the best practices?
So I would say that if you post the data as publicly available, so without a license, then anybody can do anything they want with it, and they can pretend it's their own data. As long as you put an attribution license on it, whether that's Creative Commons or Open Data Consortium, then they have to acknowledge you when they use your data, whether they repost it or use it in the paper. And so if they reposted your data and pretended it was theirs, you could go after them and say, hey, that's no good. But if you just make it publicly available, I don't think you have any maybe of a moral right, but you don't have any kind of authority to do that. That said, I don't know how much of a risk that is.
Yeah,
maybe.
my reaction is, what's the incentive for that? You posted the data publicly so you can get a lot of email. You know, I mean, that's, it strikes me that as long as you're the first mover and you publish the paper that references the data, the incentive for free riding on that is pretty limited. You know, it's like any other form of plagiarism. There is it takes place, but the incentives for it are not very attractive.
Can I just ask them clarifying question on this? This just because of not speaking the language. So when you guys talk about posting data on Harvard Dataverse, is that licensed somehow versus like posting data on my website and anybody can download it? Are there like differences?
License is whatever you say it is. You put the data there and you say, this is subject to Creative Commons attribution license. That's the license. Now on Dataverse and Zenodo, they have kind of a drop down where you can choose some prefab licenses. But if you put it on your own website, you can say it's under this license. If you don't say anything, then I think it's probably public. But yeah, and I'm with Brian. I don't know how much of a risk there is. I mean, maybe somebody's reposted my data as their own, but I haven't seen it. I wouldn't be super worried about that. But what I would do is try to have a citable object, like a paper, so that when they use it, you can get some credit.
Yeah, that's
and
the
citations.
most important feature.
Sites aren't worth a lot, but there's something, you know.
Yeah, it's a question of putting a notice when you put the data up, putting a notice saying, here's how you cite it. Make it easy, you know. I mean, the Penn Tables does that, for example. I've done it for some data sets. But
NBR,
frankly, everything I've posted in the past has had no license.
Exactly, and you've gotten a lot of credit for it, and
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone. I know of no example of someone trying to use it and not citing it. I mean,
it's generated. I mean, Adam and I have tons of citations from the data we posted. You know, and it's not like somebody else has got those citations because they have to go to our data to get it. And also, of course, it's, you know, it's patent data, so it's public to begin with.
but also, if someone wants to write a paper and publish a paper using the data, you know, they want to be able to cite someone else as having created it because it gives them more credibility with the referees. So
exactly.
in some sense, their incentives go in the right direction. If you've posted the data, as Matt says, with an appropriate documenting paper to cite, you make it very easy for them to then say, I'm using Tanya Babina's historical patent data, and they cite your paper, and then they're covered. And the referees are less inclined to say, what is this crap they're using, because there's a citation. So I think while you can't rule out somebody trying to just like get the credit for it, I think for the most part, the incentives are not terrible.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much, guys. I think it's just a matter of then, like Matt said, providing the license agreements or of suggesting how to use and cite the data, right? Related.
Well, I think Matt was right on that, you know, now if I were doing this, and which I probably will do some more of it, the Creative Commons attribution license is the right license for most of this. And if you put it on a public repository, you're forced to choose a license. So, you know, you'll be reminded to do that. So, you know, it solves the problem.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Phil had to step out at 1, and I want to just have a soft break for people who have to go.
Yeah, I have a meeting, but to comment briefly on the last thing, yes, Harvard Dataverse, the data sets are CC0, Creative Commons 0 by default. You can put in whatever license or waiver you want. We have this concept of like terms of use, terms of access. You can fill in all those fields, and then you don't have to make your data publicly downloadable. In Dataverse, we call it restricted. When you know there's still a metadata record for all your data, and then there's a button people click to say request access, and then you approve the access one by one for each person. So it's not like you have to just put it all out there if you're not ready to do that. You can at least like let the world know the data exists by way of a metadata record. And then they would contact you through the system and you would approve requests. But I do have to go. Last thing I wanted to mention is that we have our, I don't know how many, like 6th or 7th annual Dataverse community meeting coming up in June. Because of COVID, it's still online, but it's June, I think 15th, 16th, 17th. And if any of you can come, it'd be great. I'll post a link in the chat here, but dataverse.org/events will be the page to look at to learn more. Thanks again for the invitation.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
So Sam or Laura, before we quit, do you want to just put in a plug for our next session?
Absolutely. Next session, and maybe I want to spend 1 minute talking about the idea of a Dataset workshop in April.
Great.
Let's see. Agnes, can you share your screen again?
Sure. Do you want me to show the Dataset catalog?
Yes.
Cool. Got it.
So next week, we're going to have a conversation with Gaetan about patent to product, and he'll run a workshop on their experience with that data set and gathering it from a community of users. But as a reminder, we've been gathering all sorts of data sets from our community through our online forum. Okay, go ahead, Agnes.
Oh, yeah. This is just, so this is a kind of first instance of what will become a more kind of dedicated hosted version, but essentially something that we're really hoping to do, as well as, hosting things like community definitions of like what kind of format a variable should appear in, which I think is a very, very important thing and something that we'll talk more about in the future, but is to host a kind of community maintained and curated catalog of patent and innovation data related data sets. And so this is a kind of very first version of that. It is a publicly editable, not editable, Google Sheet. The link is shared in a number of different places from the III, but we'll share the link again. And this really is like, if you have any patent or innovation or legal data sets, anything that is useful in your research that you work with, you'd like other people to know about, this is a great place to put it. And in April, we wanted to host a session where we all come together and kind of collectively like edit the sheet, improve the descriptions and other things that are here already, add more data sets into it, and also then have kind of contributions from different people in the community about data sets that they like, that they enjoy using, that they think more people should know about, or this gets at what Alenka was talking about, I think earlier, is data sets that don't exist and should, or data sets that are hard to find. I really like kind of trying to think through what a catalog for innovation data could look like, as also just a place to like enumerate things that could exist or should exist in a different form. So that's the idea.
I would just add that there's a growing, we hope more and more clear page on the site that is the public data sets. What was just kind of a list is now tidy, and if you want to post information that you've got something new coming up, and you will also see the T's to the Google Sheet that Agnes just featured. So it's worth revisiting the site. It has come a long way in terms of session notes and discussion threads, and we hope more and more clear resources, but use it and add to it, and please give us feedback.
So am I understanding correctly that the spreadsheet is editable by us? Okay, good, because the Penn World tables needs updating, I noticed.
Yeah, I checked it out and it is beautiful.